What do you think of my t-shirt? A friend of mine gave it to me. He also designed and printed it and sent it to me in a parcel marked Citizen X. I was dead chuffed with it. I was also flattered that he took the trouble to listen to a few of my posts. He must have, because in one short sentence he has encapsulated everything that I've been trying to say. To reduce that down to a punchy slogan on a t-shirt is really quite something, I think. I reckon it's as good as not far right but not far wrong either, or Make All Fiction again, which are two of some of the best I've seen. Anyway, like I say, I was very, very pleased. So cheers, Hayden, you diamond geezer. If there's interest, I'll get more printed. And as he also sent me the JPEG to go with it, I've made it the thumbnail and the subject of this post. The dial, of course, is a variation of the frog slowly cooking as the temperature goes up, all the way to boiling point. David Icke calls it the totalitarian tiptoe, wherein the only small and barely noticeable freedoms are eroded incrementally so that fascism can be introduced without fuss and, crucially, without scaring the horses. But we should have noticed. We should have noticed primarily because our society belongs to us and it is our responsibility to look after it. And secondly, because there have been numerous organisations like Liberty, Privacy International and the like that do sound the alarm when our freedoms are under attack. But still we don't listen. So, seeing as I was given the impetus to expand on this slogan, I thought I would come up with 10 specific times we didn't notice, 10 times we didn't listen, and 10 times we didn't defend our rights. Number 1. Pre-charge detention. It used to be the case, and within living memory for many, that the police could hold you in detention for no more than 24 hours before deciding whether or not to charge you. Along with most civilised countries governed by the rule of law, it was deemed draconian to hold a suspect for longer, as well as being against the spirit of speedy justice as implied by Magna Carta. And that lasted for quite a considerable time. But then the Irish Republican Army kept blowing people up, and so the British state, rather than taking it on the chin and refusing to let terrorism win, which is what all governments say just before they're about to let terrorism win. So instead of doing that, they instead resorted to changing the rules by extending the pre-charge detention time to 7 days, a 7-fold increase. And once the IRA bombing campaign ceased, did it come down again to 24 hours? Did it fuck? It stayed on the statute books at that level until the Terrorism Act of the year 2000, when it was not reduced, but instead doubled to 14 days. And this was before the September the 11th attacks in the US and the July the 7th attacks in London in 2005. After that, it was jacked up again to 28 days, although Prime Minister Tony Blair unsuccessfully attempted to push for 90 days. The 28-day legislation was renewed annually until 2011, when it was allowed to lapse and return to the 14-day limit, which is the only example I've ever heard of where the liberty-security balance has swung in favour of liberty. It remains, however, the longest pre-charge detention period of any comparable democracy. In Ireland, it is 7 days, in Italy it is 4, in the US it is 2, and in Canada just 24 hours. Number 2. Removal of anonymity in public. CCTV. 30 years ago, I don't think I'd ever seen a CCTV camera. Now we have somewhere between 4 and 6 million of the wretched things. It is estimated that the average Londoner is captured on CCTV around 400 times a day. Are they making us safer? Well, the saturation of camera surveillance doesn't appear to be making much of a dent in the knife crime epidemic, where the capital's murder rate has recently outstripped New York's. And besides, despite their omnipotence, the visual quality of CCTV is usually so poor that their footage is rarely adopted as evidence in court. So if they're not really being used as a crime prevention and detection tool, what's their real purpose? And why are their numbers still going up? Well, go on a demonstration and you'll find out. They're there for control. They're there to protect them and control us. We are, as Banksy points out, one nation under CCTV. This particular dial is already all the way up to 11. Doesn't it make you feel proud to be British? Number 3, removal of freedom of movement. ANPR. Automatic number plate recognition was proudly introduced by the police in 2002 under the slogan, "Denying criminals the use of the road." What it didn't trumpet quite so loudly was that in doing so, it was also denying the law-abiding citizen the right to go about his lawful business without being routinely and covertly monitored by the state. There was no act of parliament that allowed the government this unconscionable prying into our movements, and is therefore, as far as I'm concerned, an illegal apparatus of mass surveillance. But they did it anyway. They turned that dial even further than CCTV dial. So this one, you could say, is up to 12. And now they're manoeuvring to turn it up to 13 with their probing attempts to get facial recognition, which is in effect ANPR for people, up and running. Don't hold your breath waiting for an act of parliament to legitimise it. They'll just wait until we're not looking and crank that dial up even further. Number 4, removal of the right to silence. The right to silence has been established as a principle in English common law since the 17th century. The principle being that all citizens are innocent until proven guilty, and that the burden of proof rests with the state in proving that guilt, and that the citizen cannot be coerced into doing the state's job for them. This was the principle, and the whole point of principles is that they are rules that cannot be changed just because it's convenient. The truly just state adheres to principles even when it is inconvenient. The principle should stand firm, even if it allows guilty men to go free, which it will on occasion, since the principle is there to guarantee the rights of all citizens. It is not there to guarantee the rights of all citizens except the ones we don't think should have the same rights. It was only a slight and almost imperceptible nudging of the dial, but it was one that made the state a little more powerful when they removed the right to silence. And that made the rest of us, collectively, a little less like citizens and a lot more like suspects. Number 5, removal of the right to one's own body in death. Organ donation. There is nothing that a person owns more than their own body, and nothing that the state should own less. But the state's ownership of its citizens' remains has now been very recently assumed, with the change in the law meaning that the state will now assume ownership of your body, supposedly for organ donation, unless you opt out, which I have now done so. If it had been a routine question asked by my GP or by a doctor when visiting a hospital, if I would like to consider donating my organs, I would almost certainly have said yes. Now that it has been assumed, I have taken the time and the effort to assert the opposite. I don't feel brilliant about this, but this could have been averted if they had asked me. I would have been pleased to give my organs, but when they are taken, it ceases to be a gift. It's a depressing sign of the times that we live in, that the only decision that I can actively take to assert my own agency against the state will potentially cause someone to die when they might instead survive. This was a dial they didn't need to turn. If only they had asked me. Number 6, removal of the right to one's body in life. DNA sampling. The UK's national DNA database, already one of the world's largest, was set up in 1995 and within 10 years had 3.1 million DNA profiles on it. Within 20 years, this had almost doubled to 5.77 million, and a year later, the last year for which there were figures, it had added another 90,000. In the intervening 3 years, at that rate, we can assume that over 6 million people in the UK now have their biometric data safely in the hands of the authorities, to use as leverage in whichever way they see fit. That's getting on for 10% of the entire population. Despite a much needed and well overdue piece of legislation, reassuringly entitled the Protection of Freedoms Act of 2012, introduced, it has to be said, as a result of the Liberal Democrats as junior partners in the coalition government, it continues to amass data at an alarming rate. Although the Act compels the police to destroy the samples of those not charged or found not guilty, as well it should, the database continues to grow by around 250,000 a year. In 10 years there will be another 2.5 million. In 20, another 5. 11 million dangerous criminals in a population of 65 million. That's 1 in 6. Any fool can see that this is not about crime. Like all forms of surveillance, and this amounts to surveillance after the fact, this is about, and is only about, control. Removal of the right to anonymity online. We all, if we're honest, have suspected that the security services have been tracking our movements online for some time. That hero of our times, Edward Snowden, merely confirmed beyond doubt that uncomfortable fact. Snowden sacrificed his future glittering career, along with his ability to live in the country of his birth, in favour of a chilly exile in Moscow, to tell us of the crimes, and they were crimes, of our out-of-control, power-mad and data-hungry governments. The British government in particular, having been caught red-handed by Snowden, responded first by idiotically denying the plain truth of the matter, and when that didn't work, instead belatedly put in strenuous efforts to make legal all those illegal things they'd been doing previously. The result, courtesy of Theresa May, was the Investigatory Powers Bill, better known as the Snoopers Charter. Snooping on the law-abiding public was now legal. So the principle appears to be, do something illegal, get caught doing something illegal, change the law to make the previously illegal legal. Problem solved. No arrests made, nor any charges filed against the criminals in MI5 or GCHQ. Your data, along with your own body, in life and death, is now the property of the British state. Number 8. Removal of parental charge, smacking and term time holidays. Children, of course, don't actually belong to anyone, but if they did, the people that would have the greatest claim to ownership is their parents. It certainly wouldn't be the state. Unless that state is the United Kingdom, of course. The Scottish and Welsh governments have recently inserted themselves between parents and the people they most care about in the world, their own children, by banning even the mildest form of physical punishments, presumably even including smacking the child's hand away from the bars of an electric fire, for instance. The assumption that the government knows better than parents how to discipline their own children has not yet prevailed in the whole of the UK, although neither England nor Northern Ireland will hold out for long. Countless over-emotional articles are published every day about the barbaric practice of smacking one's own children in comparison to the enlightened administrations of Scotland and Wales. Those children aren't yours, so the current narrative goes. So having established primacy over parents in a particular field, the government is now applying that principle more generally, with 223,000 parents having been fined in the previous school year for taking their children out of school during term times, which was a 93% increase from the previous year. The decision of parents nationwide to prioritise the saving of probably thousands of pounds in the family budget by going on holiday out of extortionately expensive peak periods over a few days of school has now been removed. Only the state, of course, knows what's best for your children. Not content with the obedience of citizens now, the dial is now being turned for the next generation. Number 9. Removal of cash from circulation. Cash is anonymous. Cash is almost untraceable. Cash is freedom. So that's why it has to be abolished. Cash is convenient, but it's extremely inconvenient to government. When we pay cash, there's no record. There's no paper trail. They can't tell what we've bought. They can't tell when we bought it. And they can't tell if we're supposed to be putting that money in our pockets or paying tax with it. And like the megalomaniacs that they are, that's what they just cannot stand. The cash economy is just an unregulated space, and we know how much they hate those. They want to know absolutely everything about us. Using cash doesn't really seem like a right, but it is. And the very fact of using it helps to safeguard a number of our other rights. When we use cash, we're keeping our cards close to our chest, where only we can read them. However, they contracted out the turning of this particular dial to the private sector to provide themselves with plausible deniability. But the collusion between the mighty financial institutions and the all-powerful state is there for all to see. You only have to look. Number 10. Free speech. So we haven't stood up for our right to anonymity, neither online nor in the real world. We haven't stood up for freedom of movement. We haven't stood up for our centuries-long right to silence when arrested. We haven't stood up for our natural dominion over our own bodies, in death as well as in life. And we haven't even insisted on our right to bring up our children in the way that we see fit. So where, in fact, is our line in the sand? Where is it? At what level will we finally stand our ground? When will we finally say, enough? You'd think if that point was anywhere, it might be at the point of being able to speak our minds. You'd think it would be at the point of being able to utter what was in our minds, in order to communicate freely so that others would be able to know what was in our hearts. You'd think that that might just be where we draw the line, wouldn't you? I would have. I would have thought that that was a line that the state would dare not cross. But I would have been wrong. There was a line. The line was called freedom of speech. They crossed it. They crossed it when they brought in the hate speech laws. And we let them. Shame on us. So there you have it. 10 times they tweaked the dial, and 10 times we never noticed. Or 10 times we were more concerned with the economy, or buying a new car, or the Kardashians, or watching celebrities heating flour on the Great British Wank-Off, or prancing around in sequins like God knows what in Strictly Come Dancing, and 10 times we let our rights go without a fight. Shame, shame, shame on us.